Good afternoon. I'd like to call the hearing to order and welcome everyone. This afternoon, the Interior Environmental Subcommittee continues its budget oversight hearings as we examine the fiscal year 2012 budget request for the U.S. Forest Service. And joining us to present the administration's funding request is Tom Tidwell, the Chief of the Forest Service. Thank you very much for being here, Chief, and we look forward to hearing your testimony and having a productive question and answer period after the opening statements. Also joining us this afternoon at noon is Kathleen Atkinson. She is the Forest Service's Budget Director. Ms. Atkinson has the unenviable task of making sure no one tries to fudge any of the budget numbers as we make up our various points. We appreciate you being here with us very much. Chief, as you and I have discussed, the Forest Service does not play as prominent a role in my home state of Rhode Island as it does in the states of some of my colleagues. But your agency is important to every state in the United States, particularly Rhode Island. We take opportunities through the research program. We also have access to and benefit from the state and private forestry program. The usefulness of the forest legacy and stewardship programs and conservation and management of forests is also an integral part of Rhode Island and our region's efforts to maintain our forested lands. The funds that go through these accounts are also extremely critical in being able to leverage the federal dollars with state, local, and private funds to preserve those lands. I'm also aware that our states have benefited from the programs funded through the research appropriation we have received, and specifically support in dealing with the Asian longhorned beetle, which is infesting our forest. So I look forward to your presentation this afternoon. And just briefly, for fiscal year 2012, the administration is seeking a total of $4.9 billion for the Forest Service. That's an increase of $248 million, or 5% above the equivalent 2011 enacted level. However, the overall request includes $328 million for payments under the Secure Rural Schools program, which has not been previously included as part of the service's discretionary budget. Without this funding, then the budget the administration has proposed is essentially flat. I'm particularly concerned with the large reductions in the research budget, the wildlands fire budget, and the maintenance budget. Together, these three appropriations are proposed to be nearly $600 million below the current enacted levels. That's a 20% cut. Even in these physically constrained times, I'm not sure cuts at that level are tenable. And so I think we need to be concerned with where we might find additional money to make up some of these shortfalls. Chief, let me begin with the fire budget. In the President's budget, there is an error. I understand it is a clerical error that makes your wildlife fire management request $192 million less than it should be. As you know, the subcommittee's allocation will be based on the President's budget, and it puts us at a disadvantage to have an inaccurate request. Can you tell us when we can expect to receive a budget amendment or errata to correct this error?
Well, we've shared the subcommittee's concerns with ONB, and I will also visit with them again so we can hopefully get that errata sheet up to you very shortly.
Thank you very much, Chief. Let me continue in terms of fire suppression cost. Could you give us the 10-year average that you're working with?
For 2012, we're looking at a 10-year average of $1.17 billion. And plus, when we apply the rebaselining that you've been requesting us to do for a couple of years, when we make that shift between suppression to preparedness, that 10-year average will then drop to 855. But the difference is just the shift of some preparedness costs that we've been showing in our suppression costs for the last few years, and at the request of this subcommittee, we feel it's actually it's more transparent if we actually show those costs under preparedness. And these are primarily our large aviation contracts that we have to pay up front at the start of the year, no matter how much we use those aviation contracts throughout the year. So we just believe that they actually should be shown under preparedness.
You're confident that the funds you've allocated to suppression will be adequate for the current fire season, the current budget season?
Yes, based on what we see and where we are today and where we expect to be with 2012 is that we're confident that the funds that we're requesting will be adequate to handle a moderate to active fire season in 2012.
Let me turn now to the Integrated Resource Restoration Program, which I'm sure will be the topic of several questions by my colleagues, for many years, the Forest Service did perform integrated activities under very specific budget lines. I think you'd be the first to point back several years ago how you were doing integrative things, using funds from different accounts to achieve a comprehensive approach. So the question, I think, why do we have to go to this integrated, one fund? What are the specific roadblocks that hampers a forest supervisor or regional forester from taking an integrated approach, even though they would have to technically spend from different accounts?
Well, Mr. Chairman, you're correct that we've been taking an integrated approach to our project design and planning for years. But what we're finding as we do more and more of this, our current budget structure sometimes is a barrier to promote that integration. And like based on the feedback we received from you last year, we've made some changes in this, the revised proposal, so that we will continue to track the traditional targets of board feet, miles of stream, et cetera. But by having one fund, it will help facilitate not only a more integrated approach, but it will allow us to look at the landscape and determine what work needs to be done. And based on our experiences when, in the past, when we had more flexibility with our budget, we found that we were able to get more work done. It makes it easier for not only our employees to design the work, but also for the public to be part of that process. And what happens, it builds more support for the overall work because we have a much wider range of objectives that we can accomplish with every project. And the other key part of it is there are times when you have an integrated project you want to go forward with, but there is one of the program areas, one of the fund codes that's lacking money on that unit that year. And so sometimes in the past we've actually deferred very good projects from being able to go forward because we didn't have the right mix of money to be able to do that. That's just one of the key benefits. And as we look at in these difficult economic times, and I look for ways that we can improve our efficiency, I believe by having this integrated resource restoration line item that we can be more efficient and we will actually get more work done on the ground.
Let me just follow up before I turn it over to Senator Murkowski. One of the improvements you've made, or one of the more specific measures you've included, is some commitment to the timber program in terms of the amount of board feet, I presume, that your goal. Can you point to other specific changes that are in response to the criticism of my colleagues last year?
Well, there was a couple things that, based on the comments last year, first of all, we wanted to add some additional budget line items. We felt that it was important to put some hazardous fields funding into this mix. We also feel that the Legacy Roads program, that this is a very good fit because so much of that work is done to improve the overall watershed health condition. So in addition to those funds, the other thing that we've done is to ensure that we can track the outputs along with the overall outcomes. So not only will we track board feet, miles of stream improved, acres of invasives that have addressed, overall watershed health, acres of wildlife habitat that have been improved, but then also the overall watershed condition class will also be able to track that through a new condition class assessment that we are now putting in place for the first time. So we feel that the combination of both of these, it will allow us to be able to demonstrate that we are carrying out the direction of Congress, and at the same time, you can see, especially over several years, that it's my expectation that we'll be able to increase the number of outputs that we currently are doing with the same amount of money.
Let me begin the second round and by following up on Senator Johnson's question with respect to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Now that you have an idea of the funding, in fact, a good idea of the funding for FY11, and which projects you can complete, do you expect to send us an amended list for FY12 that will take into account the projects in FY11 priority list that were not funded?
At this time, we're not planning to send up a changed list. The projects that were not funded in FY11 are the ones that we'd like to consider for our FY13 proposals.
Thank you. Let me turn to the issue of the secure rural schools, and both Senator Rakowski and I have indicated the challenge this poses to our budget. $328 million of discretionary funding, as you said, Chief. If you take it out, you have a flat budget basically. So you've had to make some hard calls within your budget to do everything before you even got to secure rural schools. Previously, this was a mandatory funding program, so it didn't impact your budget. You also recognize that we had to cut 8% from the FY11 continuing to make the continuing resolution. We don't have a Senate allocation yet. We have to fix the errata, which we've mentioned before. And the House is working with a 10% reduction below their FY11 fund. So there's huge pressure on the budget, and yet now we have this new program, more or less. And one other point I'd add, too, is the shift from a mandatory program to discretionary program, even for those schools that are benefiting, given the difficulty of funding discretionary programs, this is not something I think they can bet on for a long time or feel secure about. So that's another aspect. But essentially, I think, and I'd be very eager for my colleagues' discussions, I'm sure we'll talk about this, is that one is, are you working with the authorizers to continue this as a mandatory program so that we have flexibility in the budget to do more traditional Forest Service activities?
We've made it clear that we're very interested in finding the way to make this mandatory. I think everyone agrees. We agree that ideally that would be probably the best approach. But as we were putting together our budget proposal, as you folks well understand, it was difficult for us to find, the funding for a mandatory program. But at the same time, it's such an important program, especially at these counties, and it provides the funding for their schools and their roads. This is also not the time for this program to be discontinued, in our view. So we put it in the budget and understand the consequences. But at the same time, we want to work with the authorizing committees. We'll work with this subcommittee. We'll work with anyone that has some ideas about how to pursue the mandatory program.
Well, we look forward to working with you. Just looking at the terrain at the moment, if we get something close to the House allocation, a 10% reduction, then no program I think is sacred. So we're going to have to do something about this program. And again, this was, and I can see the premise behind the program. There was a loss of jobs, abrupt loss of jobs because of changing rules about timber cutting. Communities were at risk, and frankly, my colleagues went, as I would, to protect their constituents. But it seemed to be a 5-year program that would have a finite point, and that point now is being extended. And also, there are some communities that are still suffering grievously. Unemployment rates about 10 or 11, but looking quickly at some of the other recipients, I've seen unemployment rates down to 2.7, 3.1, 4%, which are, trust me, relative to Rhode Island, in fact, relative to Alaska, they're doing pretty well. So there are a lot of issues we have to deal with in the context of this program, and obviously we're going to be working with you, and I'm working with the ranking member to see what we can do. Let me turn to another topic. That's the priority watershed and job stabilization program. What's the current status of the watershed condition framework classifications? How far are you along?
We have completed our assessment and now have all 15,000 of our watersheds. Basically, we've classified as to what if their current conditions, if they're basically healthy and stable, if they're at risk, or if they're actually an impaired watershed. And we use a set of 10 to 12 criteria to make that determination. So we have completed that, so we now have our baseline. So as we move forward with our work over the years, we're going to be able to track the improvement by watershed.
Now, you've essentially prioritized these watersheds as you've described. Is your geographic trend, or is this going to, are you going to try to devote resources across the country based upon these critical or deficient watersheds? Is there any geographic kind of principle?
We have watershed concerns in every region of this country, and so the way I envision this will work is that within our regions, they'll make some determinations about what is the best investment, where's the best place to do the work. So I don't see any shifts in resources between regions, but I do see there'll probably be a shift maybe within national forests, and also a shift into where do we need to make the investment. And some of our watersheds, it's really a forest health issue. We have a concern of a potential catastrophic fire in there, the impacts, and that might be the highest priority work. Another watershed, it may just be improving the drainage on a few roads. I mean, that's the sort of thing that will really help us to identify where's the best investment to make. And so you will see shifts in some areas as to what type of work we need to focus on first. But I don't believe I'll see any shifts between the regions on this, and it'll probably be more shifts within the forest activities.
Let me ask a final question before I recognize the ranking member, and that is, it's priority watershed and job stabilization. Can you kind of give me the concrete link between the watershed condition and job stabilization? I mean, how does this focus on jobs differentiate from other parts of the IRR and any other elaboration about the job effect?
Well, the connection with jobs is that with this priority watershed focus is that we want to look at larger landscapes. It's one of the places I feel we can gain some efficiencies. And in the past, most of our planning and project design has been focused on relatively small acreages, 500, maybe 1,000 acres. And so we want to encourage our forest and grasslands to look at much larger project areas, like up to 10,000 acres, so that we can gain some efficiencies. Also use stewardship contracting to be able to provide some certainty about the amount of work that's going to be done over the next few years, and that is one of the places where we can, I think, increase the jobs. But by looking at larger areas this time, we'll just be able to get more work done and thus be able to put more people to work.
Thank you.